Hi, I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Good evening. Welcome to Single Shot at Roundtable at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. The theme of our tonight's episode is context. We was talking about photography for quite a while now, and almost every time we was discussing a photograph as an abstract entity that exists by itself without anything that happened before, will happen after, and what caused this image to actually appear. And tonight we have an excellent photographer with ages of experience photographing street life, Thomas Clark, to discuss how the context works with photos. Hello, Thomas, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Alex, for inviting me. I love the show. It reaches many people, I'm sure. Hopefully more.
We're trying. So. As I understand, you was photographing street life, and you always was working in sequences, not just taking one single photograph, but creating a story, a reportage, and essays, if I recall correctly, you're calling them, right?
Yes, yes. Well, I so much influenced by cinema storytelling. So when I shoot on the street, for many years I just tried to create images with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So that's the story right there. I will pick a particular subject, maybe a lifestyle of a certain culture or environment of a city, and then run with that and tell the story. So one image to me is nothing. It's so limited. Even some essays, photo essays, are limited if I compare it to film, which I do sometimes in my mind. And I know it's a different genre, but I'm so influenced by the cinematic storytelling, the narrative, that influences comes in my photographs. So, as I said, I photograph essays, personal essays. Some people today call that personal journalism. Mm-hmm. They coined that phrase a few years ago, I guess, with the cell phones. And so my thing is just to shoot film when I do essays. I use digital only for portraits of people that I might take for assignments.
Basically artistic storyboard, right?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, it's this genre is really connected to a lot of influential medias, like comic books, which shaped our modern society, if you think about it.
Yes.
But getting to the question of creating a sequence, creating the environment, how it works with the essay. As you said, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So, as I understand, the minimum for this genre, at least in the way you see it, is triptych.
Yes. Well, I would say if you do stories as I do it, you have to have images that relate to that particular environment, person, lifestyle, character, families, individuals. As I was taught one time in school, if you want to do a subject completely well, shoot thousands of pictures of it. So I did a series on trees in New York. I looked for various types of trees, and I find the character in each tree. I did that for a year, actually. And it was, exciting. It was like interesting, got in touch with nature, and everything that's alive to me is worth photographing. I find beauty in architecture, but the problem with architecture for me, it doesn't really have an essence. It's the surface beauty. If you photograph anything that's living, it has a deeper, under the skin essence. And that's what I try to do actually with anything that's alive that I photograph. Although I love to photograph architecture, but it's for me, it's not living. So it's not man himself, it's what man has created, which is beautiful, but that's not my particular approach,
My personal style and my personal interest is actually related to architecture, very strongly, and the way I feel it, it's photographing a shadow of a person instead of a person, and then trying to tell the story. It just gives you wide opportunities for
to be interpreted.
Exactly, and the interpretation is again the part of the context of the photo.
Yes, I do that also a lot. I would say it's more ambiguous and abstract instead of just a reference to a certain expression you want to show. And I work in metaphors sometimes. When I do a series of essays, I always give a title to it, and I would work on that. I would go shoot a day, shoot for months, and work until I complete that entire title that I created. I have a thing called metaphors and truth. So I would do what you said. I would do a shadow and certain things, aspects against the background of the city, alienation, whatever it could be. You know, I work on that too, as you might do with buildings. And
every person who I know working with street photography is interested in people, genuinely interested in people.
Yes, that's
and
that's
I
true.
would naturally suspect you you are as well. So what is your interest in people? How you see street photography is important? What is the importance of street photography?
For me, it's actually to have a humanistic approach and not necessarily show the inhumanity in certain lifestyles. I think that's strictly for photojournalists, and in my opinion, those type of photographs that photojournalists do never solve any problems in the world. If you think about it.
I totally agree.
Yeah, it's. I think my thing is with people, I feel a certain energy, a certain light hits their face, or I just feel that the image captures me, and I don't really go after it. In other words, I'm not looking for a particular composition, not anymore. When I was young, of course, people look for that, the geometry and all that. It's just the feeling I get from that particular environment I'm in. So I can go with that. I can spend all day with that mood in my body, in my mind. And to talk about why I do certain photographs, we can do a reference to my music appreciation, which is every day before I go out, I would listen to music, or the night before, and that type of music, it would stay in my head, and I would approach photography with that mood that I had for that particular day for some reason. It's if I listen to jazz, I'll do very slow photography, which I mean is like using various shutter speeds to get the abstract representation of documentation. And the reason why I do that is because I believe that's improvisation. As any writer, James Joyce, John Coltrane in music, they knew the basics. They knew it. I know the basics. I want to improvise. Absolutely. I mean, some photographers think that's it's abstract. It doesn't really show anything. But that's how I feel.
So the musical context actually creates the mood,
yes.
Creates the general railroad on which a train runs.
Yes, and that could change from day to day.
Can it change within one day?
No, that's true. But I mean, the context will be the same. Let's put it that way. But the improvisation might change. In other words, I would use various shutter speeds, like a 15th of a second, 30th, and an eighth sometimes, but that's going too far because it becomes very much movement in it, you know. Although, if a person's standing still and everybody's moving behind them, that's very cinematic. I love that at an eighth of a second. Yeah. I do that sometimes, you know, just intuitively. I'm not like planning that. That's why I say I could change my mind. It depends on the subjects before me. That's like I said before. The pictures capture me. Even though I have a basic theme, the pictures that I see in my mind are the physical reality there. So I'm not going to just take pictures for what that specific theme is in my head. I don't want to constrict my vision, in other words. It's very free. That's free form. That's improvisation. That's why I use the word intuitively. So, and you know, it takes practice, I guess, to get to that.
So you mentioned jazz, and what other genres do into your photography?
Say that?
You was talking about how you feel when you're listening to jazz.
Oh,
so what
yes.
about other genres?
What does that do for me, you mean?
Yeah. How is it different?
Oh, how is it different? I would say when I listen to jazz, it's more an emotional feeling in the particular photograph that I take. And some people pick that up. They feel that empathy that I might have for the particular human subject. And when I don't listen to jazz, let's say I listen to rock or something, I get very bold, and I don't care if the person likes it or not. I see a nice picture, I take it. It's, you know what I mean? It's like I'm not interfering with them, but I'm taking something that's more of a characterization of the person and not my personal feeling. Where if I listen to jazz, it's more on that state of mind is meditative, and actually photography is a meditation for me.
Indeed, like
completely.
any other form of art, it is.
Yes,
it's working
yes.
as much on your soul as on the final product.
Yes.
Well, and well, since we're talking about street photography, we mentioned it a couple of times before on our show, but I can't help to ask this question. There are two types of street photographers. Long telephoto street photographer and 35 millimeter photographer. Are you doing both? Are you doing one of those? And if you do,
I've never done telephoto street photography.
Always in the face of a person.
Yes. In fact, 24, 28, 35 millimeter. That's it. 50 sometimes, because it's more a true representation of the actual proportion of the face and all that. You know, I don't like to really distort too much. So if I do the 28, a little bit of distance then right up front, because it's too much of an abstract distortion of the reality, I think. Unless it's a complete picture that you want all of that to include with the human element.
Great. Well, we'll get back to this after this brief pause.
Yes.
Hello, Alex AG from Single Shot is here with yet another single trick. Today I want to tell you about front aperture. Everybody for some reason believes that aperture have to be in the middle of the lens, and I did so also. But at one point I've seen on eBay lenses that was actually made with aperture in front of them for conspicuously, and I started to look into it, and indeed you can have a lens that works just like this. Basically have it right in front of it, and it doesn't affect the way photograph is appearing. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's actually the truth. But what is useful about it, if you have a piece of paper with shape in it, you can put it in front of the lens, and your highlights will be right in the shape of what this piece of paper is. Single trick, watch us on YouTube. All right, we're back, and we was talking about street photography in relationship to lenses. So you do not like distortion, and actually that corresponds to jazz and corresponds to bringing the context in, making it as important as the photograph itself.
Yes.
And the way I see it.
Yes, yes, yes. Although I think when I say improvisation in terms of music and visuals, photographs, the improvisation is not, as you say, it's really not about the distortion. It's about the way you attach your vision to that particular subject. So when I say that, I mean I would use various different shutter speeds to bring out more of a feeling. And it's not a decisive moment, but it could be. That phrase was coined well for his reasons, and it worked well for Cartier-Bresson. Yeah. But you can have any moment being decisive, actually, if you decide that's it. I mean, who is to know when the peak of the action really took place unless it's geometry that you're looking for? So when I do improvisation with the form, my context, as I said earlier, is the same. It's street photography, but I'm expanding the language in a sense. So just that's why it's like jazz, because all good jazz musicians know the basics come from the blues. And improvisation comes from that, as John Coltrane, Miles Davis knew. And sometimes it's the space between that. Like if you talk about storytelling, it's the silence between the notes. So it's a continuous story that a piece may have in jazz. But the next note has to be just important as the one precedes it. So that's a story in itself. Each one is related. Each segment tells something about the music, where it's going.
Oh, comparing it to your four essays,
Yes, to the essays.
I would imagine that the things that actually wasn't captured and are not visible in what you actually put into publish
Yes.
are just as important as what you have, and that's actually those gaps for imagination,
Yes.
that unseen and unheard environment.
Yes, excellent.
And it's actually a very
Absolutely.
interesting point that some of the environment have to be left unseen and unheard. We just need to leave a little bit, at least, to imagination of the viewer
Yes.
to guess what was happening outside of this frame.
Yes, and I will expand that a bit, because I believe certain photographs, if you say strictly documentation, photojournalistic, are all subjective truth anyway.
Absolutely.
So it can't be actually a fact that this is what happened, because no one knows. You're capturing, you're recreating from a physical reality how you interpret it. So that's why editorials has to be written about certain photographs. So if they don't speak anything, they might speak the truth, but it's all your truth.
Oh, and in the recent years, we actually witnessed a lot of proof that the same story can be told in a very different way, with physical proof even made to AP standards.
Yes.
It's just all it takes is to turn the camera in a different way.
Yes. And it's maybe because the onslaught of this fake news that's coming out, so people don't know what the truth is. Even visually, we don't know, really, unless it's substantiated by facts that were there, that can be written as truth, And my photo essays in general are about just how I see it. I never say, this is how it is, this is how I felt, that's it. I see it that way. And some people, well, that's fine art. Yes, okay, it's fine art. But it is documentation also, It's a borderline. Sometimes if you do personal essays that are based on journalistic approaches, to me, you have a very small opening to show it as fine art unless you're established already. It's so many good photographers out there. People don't even know about Alex.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so basically, as I understand, what you're creating, if you would be comparing it to the literature, would be more of a novel, in
Yes.
Hemingway style, in a way.
Yes, yes. It's an ongoing process, Reality never ends in your vision as a photographer. And every day I see something I've never seen before, even though I've been here for many years. I try to explore streets that I've never been on, certain areas, neighborhoods, and it's exciting, It's a visual pleasure for me to do it,
Well, and we actually talked about the context of the photograph, talking about the image itself, but there is another form of context, the historical context and context of the photographer's environment and the viewer's environment.
Yes.
Because it's never, you never probably will have a viewer who will see the first photograph in their life. It always will be compared to something they've seen before and something from their personal experiences.
Yes. And that's where storytelling might become very important for a photo essay. And I think that takes a long time to really get an in-depth picture of a certain documentation or essay. As a novel, it doesn't come overnight. I worked on series for 2 years sometimes, 3 years, and I think I got the gist of it, of showing what I really wanted to show.
Which one was your longest?
3 years. We haven't talked about that. It's a self-published book that I did on New York horse betting. People who bet on horses all over the United States.
Oh, wow.
I was the only photographer allowed to do this. I got permission from the head of the off-track betting offices in New York. They started in 1970, and it went down in 2010 because of corruption and neighborhood complaining about different elements of society, gambling. That's a whole story I did for 3 years. And if you want to talk about it briefly, what happened was when I printed everything up, I went to galleries in New York. Some of them wouldn't accept it. They said, this is too hard for Americans to see.
Really?
Yet,
Why?
because it showed the bad aspects of gambling, welfare families, people who would lose money, even Wall Street people I would photograph, and some people didn't want that to be shown, and they didn't want to show at galleries for some reason at that time. Now maybe it's a different story.
Wow.
This was done in 1985 to 1987, 8.
Oh, I actually had completely different impression about how American art world was in
Yeah,
those
but
years. I was thinking it
know.
was very
But you
revolutionary
know
and
what?
looking for
To
something
speak
shocking.
about it briefly, I went to Paris. They didn't know me, Alex. I showed a few photographs, and they published it in a week. You see, it's something about, I understand that, it's exotic to them or whatever, but then there could be a lot of political facts involved with this,
Absolutely,
you know, that it's not necessary to actually expand on that. It's part of the nature reality in art in general for certain people, as you might know, you know. Anyway, that I did that for 3 years, and that was my longest essay
Wow,
on
it's
gambling.
actually fascinating work. And since you mentioned, as I understand, and as I know, you was doing street photography in quite a few places outside of our borders.
Yes, that's true.
And how would you say the reaction of the subjects and general experience compares in different places?
Very good question. I think to be a good photographer on the street, you have to be detached from your personal vision in terms of like, oh, I need to get this photograph from these people. It looks so beautiful. I think people can pick up on that in certain countries. They can pick up on your energy and saying, well, it's a negative thing. You're doing it for yourself. It's almost like I felt that. And let's say India, for example, where I went for 28 days in Nepal. I was not bothered whatsoever, no matter where I went to photograph. People loved it. In San Francisco, it's a little bit different. I studied in San Francisco.
At the same time period.
It's the same period.
There is a big
yeah.
switch
A big
going
switch
on in the way people
and that's a
perceive the
cultural
photograph.
thing. It could be
Indeed.
anything we could talk about, but it's the way people are brought up and all that, you know.
We'll get back to it after, the break, after our pause. Single trick by single shot. Today I want to tell you about the least quantifiable quantity of the lens. I will be talking a lot about it, and that would be the lens character. It's a combination of lens optics, the way they made, the way they coded, its properties based on its focal length and everything else, which makes every lens to have a unique way it interprets the image. In order to show you the difference, I brought 3 lenses that all the same focal length, 135 millimeters, made for the same kind of camera and at the same time period. They're made by Leica, Zeiss and Schneider. So I will just take a picture with all 3 of them and you will be able to see the difference yourself. And that's pretty much what lens character is. We back.
You know that Canon? You remember that?
Yeah, during the pause I was actually talking about the first rangefinder, and I was mentioning that on our show we had one of those cameras, and I do believe the second one was Leica, but don't quote me on that. Maybe it was Canon.
Maybe.
Yeah. So getting back to what we was talking about, the street photography
In different
India.
cultures. Oh, India, yes. What I found in India, in the parts that I went, families were so happy to be photographed like it was a privilege. And for some reason, I think it's because they were happy with their lives, even though it was like poverty amongst many of the people I photographed. They would invite me to their homes and be photographed, give me tea, and it's a complete turnaround. I've never experienced that as a photographer, where I photograph. No other country except Nepal was the same, which is not far from India.
How was it different from India, actually?
Actually, to be honest, the Nepalese people were more giving, more smiling, more down to earth for some reason.
Interesting.
Not thinking about just because you're from America, you should have money. But in India, maybe because the poverty, they would expect that you had money, so it could be reasons that's why they wanted to
maybe
come.
It's related to stronger colonization.
Yes, it could be. Yes, I didn't want to go investigate that, analyze people. I don't. That's not my agenda.
And I just wanted to briefly mention it and how this compares to European reaction on street photography. Because we spoke about America, India, and Europe.
Europe. You know, that's my favorite part of the world for like selling or representing my work in galleries. London, especially, they had seen some of my work over the years, some galleries, and they were so appreciative of the humanism that I represented. And some people would say this is very authentic, and they didn't realize it was coming from an African-American photographer born in New York. They thought it was more of a European aesthetic, so they just assumed, not knowing my face or anything. And when they found out, they were even more astonished in a sense, you know. I understand that though, because I know a lot of African-American photographers who represent their culture, which is nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, my experience is universal. That's how I grew up. I went to Catholic school with Italians and Polish people, you know, so you know what I'm saying?
Of the world.
Yeah, yes.
That's what we are, New Yorkers, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what photography is about.
Indeed it is.
Street photography, especially.
Well,
Excuse me.
there is still so much I would like to talk about.
Yes.
Maybe we all need to get back to this conversation.
Hopefully, that'd
Maybe
be great.
meet on the street and just
Excellent.
capture you in your
Excellent.
environment.
I would love that. Yes, thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you very much. It was
It's
really
a pleasure.
pleasure.
I love it.
Great job.
Yeah, I know. I think so.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark Unger for Roundtable. Thanks for watching.